All right. Welcome back, everybody. You ready to do another deep dive?
Always ready.
Cool. So today's going to be a little different. Instead of looking at a bunch of different articles and stuff, we're going to focus on just one. We're going to really dissect it and see what it tells us about the wider world of politics.
Yeah.
It's like using a magnifying glass to uncover these hidden details and connections.
I think that's a great approach.
Yeah.
Sometimes just one piece of writing can be a window into the much larger trends and shifts happening.
And the article we're diving into today, it's called Joe Scarborough Calls on Dems to Wake Up, Radically Disconnected from the Rest of the Country.
Okay.
It was published just yesterday, November 6th, 2024, on IJR,
Okay.
Independent Journal Review.
Right.
And I want to be clear right off the bat.
Yeah.
We're not here to tell you whether we agree or disagree with Scarborough.
Right.
Our goal is to take his analysis and use it as a starting point to understand the political landscape.
Yeah. It's about using it as a lens, right? To examine the bigger picture, not necessarily endorsing his viewpoint.
So Scarborough comes out swinging right.
He does.
He says Democrats are radically disconnected from the rest of the country. He's not mincing words, is he?
Not at all, no.
Yeah.
And to understand what he means by that, we really have to dig into the evidence he's using.
Okay.
And one of the things he points out, this really jumped out at me, is that 45% of Latino voters supported Trump in this election.
Oh, wow.
That's a number that might surprise a lot of people.
It does.
And it really challenges some common assumptions we have about voting demographics.
It definitely makes you wonder what's going on beneath the surface. So what do you think? What does this tell us about the political landscape? Why should our listener even care about this statistic?
Well, I think it shows us first and foremost that we have to be really careful about making assumptions about entire groups of people, right? Like the Latino community is incredibly diverse, and their political views are just as diverse, right? This number suggests that maybe the Republican message resonated with a big chunk of those voters. And that's something both parties need to look at.
Yeah. I mean, it's like we're seeing these tectonic plates shifting in American politics. And this election result, it's like a sign of that movement.
Exactly. And it brings us back to what Scarborough's saying, right?
Yeah.
About Democrats needing to wake up.
Yeah.
Essentially, he's saying they've lost touch with a significant portion of voters. They need to take a hard look at their strategies if they want to win elections going forward.
He even says they'll keep losing if they don't change.
Yeah.
And he compares this election to Reagan's landslide in 1984. It's not just a blip, he's saying. This is a trend.
Right. And that comparison is really interesting because it makes you wonder, are we seeing like a temporary swing? Or is this a more fundamental realignment happening?
A realignment that could reshape American politics for years.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're starting to get a clearer picture here.
Yeah.
But to be fair to the Democrats, right? There are always multiple factors at play in any election.
Always.
So we got to dig a little deeper.
Yeah. And we should look at other viewpoints too. Scarborough gives us one perspective.
Of course.
So we need to broaden our view.
Exactly. So for our listeners, what are the key takeaways so far from our deep dive into Scarborough's analysis?
Well, I think this highlights how important it is to stay informed and to think critically.
Right.
Even though it's just one perspective, it can make you think more deeply about what's going on politically, right?
It's a reminder that we can't just passively consume information.
Right.
We got to question things, analyze.
Connect the dots.
Yeah, connect the dots. And that means seeking out diverse viewpoints.
Absolutely.
Right. Not just relying on one source.
Exactly.
So we've talked a lot about Democrats and what Scarborough says about them. But what about the Republicans? What does this election and their success tell us about their strategies and how they connect with voters?
That's the question, isn't it? And while this article doesn't really go into the Republican side, I read between the lines, right?
Okay.
When he talks about Democrats being radically disconnected, he's implying that Republicans are seen as more in tune with the electorate.
So it's like we're looking at a mirror image.
Right.
We're seeing one side's weaknesses, and that tells us something about the other side's strengths.
Exactly. But to really understand the Republican side, we need to look at more information.
Right.
What were their main points? What were their messages? And did they resonate with voters?
Were they tapping into economic anxieties or maybe cultural concerns? Or was it like a whole bunch of things?
It's probably a mix, right? But one thing's clear. They were able to really connect with voters who felt like no one was listening.
And being able to connect with voters is crucial for any party.
Absolutely. It's all about understanding the needs and concerns of the people you're representing.
Now, back to the article for a sec. Scarborough mentions that it was the Associated Press that called the election for Trump.
Yeah.
Why do you think he included that?
Well, the Associated Press is seen as pretty reliable and unbiased.
Yeah.
So I think he's adding credibility to his point.
It's like he's saying, this isn't just my opinion, it's a fact.
Right. He's grounding his argument in reality.
And then he goes on to emphasize how big the Republican win was, right? Control of the presidency, the Senate, and probably the House, too.
Which means they'll have a lot of power to shape things in the next few years.
So it brings us back to that earlier question right now. Are we just seeing a temporary shift? Or is this like a fundamental realignment in American politics?
It's too soon to tell for sure, but this election has definitely shaken things up.
Yeah. And we're going to be feeling those aftershocks for a while.
Exactly. That's why it's so important for all of us, as citizens, to stay informed and engaged and participate in this conversation about the future of our country.
So before we wrap up this part of the deep dive, I want to circle back to that 45% of Latino voters who supported Trump.
Right.
What are the long-term implications of that? How does that challenge our traditional ideas about voting demographics?
That's a really good question. I mean, it really flips the script on those old narratives about how certain groups are supposed to vote. Right?
Like the idea that all Latinos are going to vote for Democrats?
Exactly. This shows us that the Latino community is not a monolith. There's a wide range of viewpoints there.
And it also makes you wonder how effective each party is at reaching out to these different voters.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Both parties need to stay on top of the changing needs of voters.
Right.
Especially those who don't fit into neat little boxes.
So this one statistic about Latino voters, it really tells us that the political landscape is always changing.
It is.
And we can't just assume things are going to stay the same.
Nope. We got to be willing to challenge those assumptions.
This deep dive has been amazing, but we're just scratching the surface here, right? We want to encourage everyone listening to keep exploring these issues.
Definitely.
Keep digging deeper into what matters to you.
And don't be afraid to have those tough conversations with people.
A well-chosen source can be, but this is just the beginning.
Just the beginning.
Keep those minds sharp, those perspectives open, and we'll see you on our next deep dive. So, going back to Scarborough's article.
Yeah.
There's this real sense of urgency in his words, like he's almost issuing a warning.
I definitely got that sense too. He's not just analyzing the election. He's really trying to sound the alarm.
And that's got to carry some weight, right?
Exactly, especially coming from someone like him.
You're talking about his background.
Yeah, as a Republican congressman.
Yeah.
And now as a commentator, he's been on both sides of the aisle.
Right.
He knows how the system works from the inside.
That's what makes his take so interesting. So for our listener, what does this all mean? What are the key takeaways from this deep dive into Scarborough's analysis?
Well, I think one big takeaway is the importance of staying informed, right? And engaging in critical thinking. This article, even though it's just one perspective, it shows how a single piece of writing can really spark a deeper conversation about politics.
It reminds us that we can't just sit back and passively absorb information, right? We need to be actively questioning and analyzing.
Exactly. We have to connect the dots, think for ourselves, and seek out different viewpoints.
And not just rely on one source.
Right.
Speaking of diverse viewpoints, we've spent a lot of time talking about the Democrats and Scarborough's critique of them. But what about the Republicans? What does this election tell us about their strategies, how they connect with voters?
That's a great point. And even though this article doesn't explicitly dive into the Republican side, we could still pick up on some clues.
Okay.
Remember how we emphasized that the Democrats are radically disconnected? Well, that kind of implies that the Republicans were seen as more in tune with the voters, right?
Yeah, it's almost like a mirror image, right?
Exactly.
We look at one side's weaknesses and it tells us something about the other side's strengths.
Right. But to really understand the Republican side of things, we need to look beyond this one article.
Yeah, absolutely.
We need to ask those questions. What were the Republicans focusing on? What messages were they sending? And how did those messages land with voters?
Were they tapping into anxieties about the economy or maybe cultural anxieties or both?
It's likely a combination of factors, but what we can see clearly is that they were able to effectively communicate with a segment of the electorate that felt like they weren't being heard.
And that ability to connect, to really speak to voters is crucial for any political party.
Absolutely. It's about understanding the needs, concerns, and hopes of the people you are representing.
Going back to Scarborough's article, he specifically mentions that it was the Associated Press that called the election for Trump. Do you think there's a reason he included that detail?
I think so. The Associated Press is generally seen as a neutral and trustworthy source, So when they declared Trump the winner, it kind of adds weight to his overall argument, right?
It's like he's saying, this isn't just my take, this is based on solid facts.
Exactly. He's trying to anchor his analysis in objective reality.
And he also highlights just how big this Republican win was.
Yeah.
Control of the presidency, the Senate, and likely the House, too.
Which means they're going to have a lot of power to shape the political landscape in the coming years.
This brings us back to that question we asked earlier. Are we witnessing a temporary shift in the political landscape? Or is this something more fundamental?
It's still too early to say definitively, but it's clear that this election has really shaken things up.
Yeah, and those aftershocks are going to be felt for a long time.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important for all of us to stay informed, to engage in critical thinking, and to be a part of the conversation about the future of our country.
Before we wrap up, I want to touch on that 45% of Latino voters who supported Trump again. What are the implications of that in the long run? And how does it challenge our traditional assumptions about voting demographics?
That's a great question. It really challenges the old narratives about how certain groups are supposed to vote.
Right, like the idea that all Latinos vote for Democrats.
Exactly. It shows that the Latino community is not a monolithic block. There's a spectrum of political views there.
It also makes you question how effective each party is at reaching out to those different voters.
Absolutely. Both parties need to adapt and be responsive to the changing needs and concerns of voters, especially those who don't fit neatly into predefined categories.
It's about recognizing that people's political beliefs are complex. They can change and evolve over time.
Absolutely.
So, to our listener, this one statistic about Latino voters serves as a really important reminder that the political landscape is constantly in motion. We can't just rely on old assumptions.
We have to be willing to question those assumptions and dig deeper to understand the nuances of why people vote the way they do.
This has been such a great discussion. We've only scratched the surface here, though, right?
Oh, yeah. There's always more to explore.
We want to encourage everyone listening to keep digging into these issues, to keep exploring what matters to you.
And don't be afraid to engage in those tough conversations with people, even if you disagree.
Exactly. It's about using information to form your own opinions.
It's about thinking critically and being an active participant in our democracy.
This has been a fantastic reminder of just how much we can learn from taking a deep dive into even a single source. But this is just the starting point.
Yeah, just the beginning.
Keep your mind sharp and those perspectives open, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.
So it seems like this one article about Joe Scarborough and what he had to say about the Democrats, it's really opened up this whole conversation about the forces shaping American politics.
Yeah, it's not just about winning or losing an election. It's about trying to understand these underlying currents, right? What's driving these shifts in how people are feeling about politics? And as we've seen, it's complicated. Yeah, it's not something we can just glance at and think we understand.
Exactly.
We really have to examine the evidence, consider different perspectives, really try to wrap our heads around what's going on.
It's a call to think critically about everything we're reading and hearing.
Especially these days with social media and how fast news travels.
Right. We need to be careful, question what we see, and look for different viewpoints.
Because at the end of the day, a well-informed population, that's what makes a democracy strong.
Absolutely.
We need to be engaged, informed, and ready to participate in shaping our country's future,
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it's been such a great discussion, and it's a powerful reminder of how much we can learn from even just one source, if it's the right source.
Right.
But as we've said, this is just the beginning.
Oh, yeah.
We really encourage all of you listening to keep digging into these topics, delve deeper into the things that matter to you,
And don't be afraid to have those conversations, even with people who see things differently than you do.
Yeah, you don't always have to agree, right? It's about using what you learn to form your own opinion.
Exactly. And that's the beauty of deep dives like this. We're not giving you all the answers, but we're hopefully giving you the tools to find your own.
Yeah, keep those minds sharp and those perspectives open. And we'll see you on our next deep dive.